We're going to now move on to Milli Hill. She's from the UK. Milli Hill is a writer and journalist with bylines in The Telegraph, The Guardian, The Mail, and more. She's the author of 3 books: The Positive Birth Book, Give Birth Like a Feminist, and for preteen girls, My Period. She's a passionate champion of the power and wonder of female biology. Milli Hill has been involved in the world of positive birth since 2012, when she set up a grassroots organisation to improve birth, the Positive Birth Movement. At that time, it was completely acceptable to talk about women and the power of female biology. However, all that's changed. In November 2020, Milli Hill was attacked online and dropped as a supporter of the charity Birthrights for stating that obstetric violence is violence against women. So Milli's going to talk to us about this, and with the title, The Power of Women's Bodies No Longer Allowed. So thank you so much, Milli, and over to you.
I write a lot about birth and female biology. And my key area of interest is, and I think has always been, the narratives that women are told about their female bodies, how these are so often negative, and how this impacts on their real world experience. For example, difficult and traumatic birth, low self-esteem and body confidence, feeling that their bodies are dysfunctional or even disgusting, body shame, period stigma, relationships, sex, and so much more. So until around a year ago, I was well known and highly regarded in the birth world. Well, I'm still well known, but I'm not highly regarded anymore. And I spoke at many events and conferences. I founded the organisation, the Positive Birth Movement, in 2012, and I ran it. And what that organisation was a network of groups around the world for women to go to, sometimes with their partners, sometimes, amazingly, the groups were actually women only. Again, something which would be very problematic now, just a few years later. And they were places for women to go and talk about birth to each other and become informed by sharing their own stories and their own perspectives. And at its peak, the Positive Birth Movement had about 450 groups around the world. So I've been asked to say a little bit about what happened in terms of my so-called cancellation. So in November 2020, just about this time last year, I was attacked online by others from the birth world, actually, not by, anonymous, trans activist accounts, but actually from people whose names I knew, really, in the birth world, for saying that obstetric violence is violence against women. I'll tell a little bit more about the story in a minute. And I was also dropped by the charity Birthrights, who I wasn't employed by, but I'd worked alongside them and supported them for nearly a decade. And they made it quite clear that they would no longer associate with me because of my views. Before that happened, just to give a bit of background, I had already been thinking a lot about gender and how I felt about it, I suppose, particularly in terms of being a writer and feeling that pressure to use new terminology and considering that, because, who wouldn't? The phrases in particular that leapt out at me and made me pause were assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth, and women and birthing people. And everybody in the birth world was using that phrase, just about 2 or 3 years ago. So the phrase assigned female at birth, for example, I was really confused by that, because I thought, well, where's this come from? I didn't really understand where it's coming from, but I knew it, just from a biological point of view, it wasn't accurate. Or just from a, literally what happens point of view, people are not assigned their sex at birth. Most often it's observed in utero at the scan, and it's not really assigned. It kind of is something that's innate. So kind of from a language point of view and just from a factual point of view, I was quite confused by it and uncomfortable with that phrase. And then the phrase birthing people, I was thinking, well, that's an interesting expression. Where's it come from? It's a very new term. Somebody must have been the first to use it. Somebody must have been the person who put that forward as what we all have to say now. But when I started to ask polite questions about those phrases, this was what really got me interested, because I was very quickly shut down. I was very quickly given the message that it is not okay to question that. This is, and even to the point of being asked to leave online groups and that sort of thing. So that got me really interested, so that I started to do a lot more reading and research. And the more I read, the more I started to have concerns that stretched far beyond the birth world and terminology. I felt uncomfortable with what was happening in terms of the definition of woman being changed. For example, when you say women and birthing people, you are suggesting there are two types of people that give birth: women and birthing people. And this changes the definition of the word woman. It's quite clever because everyone who uses the phrase thinks that they're being kind and inclusive, but actually they are participating in the change of a definition of a word. And if anyone tells you that this is normal because language evolves, it doesn't. Barely any words have ever changed definition, in particular not the key nouns like man, woman, dog, tree, etc. Their definitions don't change. My other concerns were that by changing my language, this was a signal that I signed up to the whole package of gender ideology, and I don't. I don't sign up to the affirmation model of care for children with gender dysphoria, for example. I don't sign up, and this is something I've learned more about since then, is, to the changing of lesbian and gay to mean same gender attracted. So I became more and more resistant to these changes because I felt that they were representative somehow of an allegiance to an ideology that I don't share. So just to tell you a little bit more about what happened, let me just open up my thing. So it was last November, and it was the International Day to End Violence Against Women. And somebody tagged me in a comment in a post on Instagram, which was a post about obstetric violence. Well, obstetric violence is a conversation that I've been very involved in, and my second book, Give Birth Like a Feminist, is largely focused on obstetric violence. And the slide said, obstetric violence is about power and patriarchy. So I was like, yeah, I can sign up to that. Then the first phrase on the slide says, birthing people are seen as the fragile sex who need to be kept under patriarchal authority by doctors. And that kind of made me laugh out loud, because I thought that's such a funny mix of old and new terminology, really, to use that phrase, the fragile sex, and apply it and say birthing people are seen as fragile sex, just seemed a bit silly to me, and a bit sort of ignorant of a lot of feminist ideas and history. So when I saw it, I commented on it, and I felt a bit compelled to speak. So I said, good to see this post. I would challenge the term birthing person in this context, though, especially on International Day to End Violence Against Women. It is women who are seen as the fragile sex, and obstetric violence is violence against women. Let's not forget who the oppressed are here and why. And the person who had tagged me said, obstetric violence is violence against anyone on the receiving end of obstetric violence: women, trans men, non-binary people, anyone. And so I said, well, personally, I think it's part of violence against women. But if you disagree, then at least don't leave them out and say women and birthing people. So I thought that was pretty moderate, really, and fairly open to, other people's opinions and ways of doing things. But very quickly, sort of all hell broke loose online. And just to tell you some of the things that I was called: obviously a TERF, I'm not a feminist, it was violence, she's trash, don't buy her books, her rhetoric churns my stomach, the hashtag don't be a Milli, I was this great, powerful, influential person, silence and money was feeding my influence, throw my book in the bin, I'm toxic, I'm dangerous, transphobic, poison, hateful, vile. I mean, the list goes on. And then, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, an organisation called Birthrights kind of joined in, because they put up a post that day when all of this, the fires were raging, to not naming me directly, but saying that they were proud to be an inclusive organisation, and that they would use the terms women and birthing people, and that they would not work with individuals and organisations who do not share these values, etc. So it didn't take very long for people to work out who and what they were referring to. And it really was, in a way, like a kind of rubber stamping of my cancellation by quite a highly regarded organisation. Birthrights have since refused to apologise to me for any of this and stand by what they did. So that's quite disappointing. Yeah, that's basically the story. So I kept very, very quiet. I was very, very damaged and upset by those events, as you can imagine, and I didn't really know what to do. And I was very silenced for quite a long time. I kept very quiet about it until in the summer this year, I decided, because of other people who were speaking out, you know, Chimamanda's blog that was really amazing, and what happened with Jester Wiles, and other things that were going on, I just felt more and more, and the Maya Forstater case, all of these things made me begin to feel more brave. So I wrote about what happened to me. Some of you may have read. So since then, overall, I've had a huge amount of support, which has been absolutely amazing and wasn't necessarily what I expected. I kind of thought maybe this is it, you know, I'm just literally putting the plug on myself. But I felt like I wanted to stand up and say what I thought was right. And so I did. But the support has been enormous. I have been prevented from speaking at a conference in New Zealand. There's been a big petition against me speaking there, which I was just going to do on Zoom. But other small things have happened. Quite a lot of the midwifery groups and birth groups that I belong to won't mention my name or have me in there. I'm sort of Voldemort, really. But overall, you know, it's been really a positive experience, and I feel so much better for having spoken about what happened, and I feel so much better for being, you know, true to myself, really, not being silenced. But just to talk a little bit about the, you know, the language changes in the maternity world. The birth and maternity world is utterly ideologically captured by all of this, and everybody is using these new words and expressions and meanings of the word woman. At the same time, you will be told repeatedly that this is not happening. The word woman is not, the definition is not being changed, it's not being erased, but you can see it happening with your own eyes in front of you. So it's an unbelievable act of gaslighting. Also, you get told, oh, it's just adding more ink. So there's this idea that woman is going to stay, but you just have to add more ink and put in the other words like birthing people. But again, you don't have to look very far online to find millions of examples where the word woman is missing. So, you know, obviously I expect some of you have been seeing some of them recently, but the most obvious one to mention is the front cover of The Lancet, where the quote was about bodies with vaginas. Just getting up my slides. So the Lancet front page, for those who don't know, historically, the anatomy and physiology of bodies with vaginas have been neglected. They said that completely without irony. And then there was another very high profile incident of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote about abortion rights being changed, taking out the word woman. The decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life was changed to a brackets person's life, etc. And there are lots of other examples on a smaller level. You know, there's everything you need to know about HPV in vulva owners. There's some NHS quotes that I've got here where they're just talking about so important. There's no mention of the word woman. So Public Health England have launched a new campaign about looking after our mental health. This is so important for birthing people to look after their mental health. We are delighted to announce that pregnant people can now have 2 birth partners. I've got lots of examples if anyone wants me to send them some. There's a few on Twitter as well. Conversely, the charity Prostate Cancer UK recently tweeted, you know, they were picked up on, you know, using biological language, you know, talking about men in their tweets about prostate cancer. They said, we are of course aware that trans women have prostates. However, we want to reach as many at-risk individuals as possible and have chosen to use the word men to achieve this. If you would like to discuss this further, please call this number. So they were very clear that the best way to talk to their target group, which is men, was to use the word men, and they seem to have been able to get away with that, whereas women's organisations seem to be finding that much more difficult. I think people are waking up. Let me get back so I can see you all. Every week there seems to be something new, certainly here in the UK, in terms of, an awakening and a pushback. Recently, the Stonewall podcast has, on the BBC, has shown how this ideological capture has filtered into all these different organizations. And that was certainly very enlightening for me to listen to and kind of think about how it had indirectly trickled down into maternity, birth, etc. And menstruation is another area where it's all gender neutral these days. I think the case with Kathleen Stock has really highlighted for everybody what's going on. I'm talking about mainstream here. And also the fantastic article on the BBC about lesbians and the cotton ceiling, which all of these things would have seemed, unbelievable like a year ago, something like that would make the BBC. So I think overall it feels positive, and things seem to be changing in terms of people are challenging, the situation and waking up to what's happening. Originally when all this happened, I thought, why me? Why was I specifically becoming drawn into this discussion? Why was I under fire? But now it's clear to me, I stand and have always stood for the power of female biology. That's been what I've talked about and written about for about 10 years. So I'm saying essentially there is something special about being a woman or a girl. And I'm saying that some of that, not all of it, is centered in our biology. I'm saying things like periods are interesting and cool. I'm saying things like birth is a powerful rite of passage, etc. No wonder they have come for me, because this narrative runs directly counter to the narrative of gender ideology. And coincidentally, it runs counter to the narrative of patriarchy I was previously trying to challenge. It used to be the patriarchal voices that tried to silence me and shut me down, saying things like natural birth is dangerous, a healthy baby is all that matters, women shouldn't take an active role in their birth. I used to get it in the neck for encouraging women to be the key decision maker in the room. And I used to have people coming after me on Twitter 5 years ago for encouraging women to, take an active role in their birth choices, because, really every woman should just be lying back and thinking of England when they're having a baby and doing what the obstetrician says. But now it's the gender ideologues who are doing the job of silencing my voice instead.
You said that the birthing and maternity world is captured. Why? Why do you think that is, in it sort of from your understanding of it? Why do you think they became captured so quickly?
Well, it's a really good question, and I wish I knew the answer really. But I mean, like I said, the Stonewall podcast is quite interesting in seeing how that sort of it's come from the top down, I think, in some ways, and so that explains some of it. I think there's just so many things that have collided together that have worked well. It's the whole be kind and be inclusive message is something that totally fits in with women in particular who are working in the world of things like doulaing and midwifery, who are by their nature people who are interested in being kind and inclusive. They're not, fat cat bankers or whatever. They're people who actually really want to do something positive in the world and be good people. So I think it quickly plugs into those women's sense of social justice with lowercase. Have you
talked to some of the women, or I suppose men, but that in the world, in the birthing and maternity world, about why they, how do they articulate it, or is it just, will they not talk to you?
Some people won't talk to me. I think some people, what I was going to say as well, actually, was about the parallel that gets drawn with sort of the gay rights of the 80s and around that time is quite a powerful one for people. I think a lot of people see it like that, or they've been told that it's the same as that, and they believe it. They believe it's about accepting, and also just being flexible and changing a language, and it's not going to hurt anyone, and they haven't really thought it through. So I think some people just haven't thought it through. They aren't having these conversations that your wonderful group of people are having today. They're not hearing these ideas. That's why I'm pleased that it's starting to trickle into mainstream media. Well, not trickle, flood really into mainstream media more, because I think a lot of people just hadn't really considered these issues. They hadn't thought, what about lesbians? You know, how does that work if you're same-sex attracted? And we just, you know, I think it's just been sold to people as it's just like gay rights. You've just got to change your language a little bit and it's going to be really inclusive and helpful for people. And that's all there is to it. It's really interesting to ask, how can women be demonized in this way so easily? I think that's a question that I don't really understand, because until this point, until I sort of fell from grace, I was considered, you know, I had a lot of people in my fan club, so to speak, which, you know, is fine. And I don't really mind either way. But, you know, the thing that interests me is how can you demote somebody so rapidly and go from thinking they're a great person to thinking they're this horrific, horrendous, evil, Nazi, fascist, witch, racist, whatever, you know? I just thought I'd say that.